Welcome to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, your window into relationship, identity, safety, emotional awareness, regulation and intelligence, unleashed potential, passion and purpose.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines. This is a trauma-informed leadership series episode, and I'm Krista Fee. Today, we're asking a question that makes a lot of leaders uncomfortable. Who are you without the title? That badge, that rank, that office door with your name on it, maybe the uniform, your corner office, the title that you've worked your whole life to earn. What happens if it's gone tomorrow? Who are you then? For trauma-informed leadership, this isn't a hypothetical. It's a reality that we have to face. Because identity tied to title is fragile, and fragile leadership doesn't last. I once sat with a retired general who had spent decades leading troops, commanding respect, and living with authority. But when the uniform came off, he struggled. He told me that I don't know who I am. Out there, I was general. In here, I'm just a man in a quiet house. His story isn't unique. Many military, first responders, executives, pastors, and community leaders experience what psychologists call role identity foreclosure. When your sense of self is so tied to a role that losing it feels like losing your very being. That's why this question matters. If your entire identity is wrapped in a title, your leadership isn't secure, because at some point, titles end. So let's dive into this identity versus role. Here's the difference. Role identity is what you do. It's your job, your function, your rank, the labels that you take on throughout your lifetime. And we carry many, many different ones. Your core identity, however, is who you are. Your values, your character, your essence. This is the part that's still there no matter how roles and labels change. When leaders confuse these two things, they build fragile foundations and identity confusion. When leaders separate them, they build resilience. Because the truth is that your title can be stripped, but your core identity, the compass of who you are, can't be taken unless you hand it over. So let's talk about neuroscience a little bit. Why identity matters to your brain. From a neuroscience perspective, identity is equal to safety. Our brains are constantly scanning for belonging. Who am I? Where do I fit? What's my role in this tribe? Titles give quick answers, but when they vanish, the amygdala flares up and signals danger, disorientation, and even grief. This is why many leaders spiral after retirement or career loss. Their nervous systems experience it literally like a death, because in a way it is, the death of a role that they mistook for self. Trauma-informed leadership invites us to anchor identity deeper than titles into values, purpose, and integrity. So let's talk about a historical example. George Washington. He could have been king. After the Revolutionary War, some people tried to crown him, but Washington refused. He walked away from absolute power and returned to his farm. Why? Because his identity wasn't the titles. His identity was anchored in his values, service, integrity, a strong belief in democracy. That's why his leadership remains so iconic today, because he proved that who he was mattered more than what he was called. This happens often when a responder is injured. I knew a firefighter who was injured on the job and forced into early retirement. For months, he spiraled into depression. He told me, I'm nothing if I'm not a firefighter. But through therapy and reflection, he began to rediscover his core. Courage, service, brotherhood. Those weren't tied to the title. They were tied to his essence. Eventually, he started mentoring young recruits, and he told me, I finally realized that being a firefighter was how I expressed my identity. but it wasn't my identity itself. And that shift saved him. I'll even share with you a little of my own struggle with identity. I'll be honest, I've wrestled with this too. There were seasons when my entire sense of self was tied to what I was building, what I was achieving, or the recognition that I was getting. When doors closed or seasons shifted, I felt completely unmoored. I asked myself, who am I if I'm not doing this work? Who am I if the microphone is taken away? Who am I if people stop listening? And the truth I had to face was this. If my identity depends on titles or applause, it will crumble. But if it rests on values, healing, and truth, it can weather any change. And it's important for us to look at the shadow side. What happens when leaders lose themselves? We've all seen it. The officer who can't retire because he doesn't know who he is without the badge. The CEO who loses her job and spirals because her identity was only the boss lady. The pastor who burns out because his worth was tied only to the pulpit. When leaders lose themselves in titles, they don't just hurt personally. They hurt their communities because they lead from insecurity, grasping for validation instead of having grounded identity. Looking at this through a trauma lens, we can see why identity gets twisted. Trauma complicates identity. If you grew up never feeling enough, titles become a way to prove your worth. If you were shamed, roles become your armor. If you were overlooked, leadership positions become validation. Here's the danger. When trauma drives identity, leadership becomes about filling wounds instead of serving people. And movements built on wounds eventually collapse. Trauma-informed leadership asks us to heal so that we can lead from identity, not from injury. So let's dive into some real-world actions that you can use for reclaiming your core identity. How do we separate who we are from what we do? Name your values. What principles define you regardless of your role? Integrity, justice, compassion, courage. There's hundreds of possibilities. Write them down. Notice your attachments. Where do you cling to titles for worth? Pay attention to the panic that arises when you imagine losing them. Practice role shedding. Intentionally spend time in places with people who don't know who you are based on what you do. Who do you become when no one knows what you do? Anchor in purpose. Purpose goes deeper than position. What do I exist to give the world? And invite honest reflection. Ask the people you love and trust the most. Who do you see me being when the titles are gone? It's time to dig into that neuroscience insights and focus it on identity and plasticity. The good news is your brain is plastic. Identity can shift. You can retrain your nervous system to anchor worth in values rather than external validation. It's not easy, and it feels like withdrawal at first. But over time, grounding in core identity creates resilience that titles can't shake. I'll tell you another story about a teacher without a classroom. During the pandemic, many teachers lost their classrooms overnight. One teacher told me that if I'm not in front of kids, am I even a teacher? But then she realized that her identity wasn't the classroom. It was cultivating growth, sparking curiosity, building resilience, and she could do that in 100 ways, online, in mentoring, in her own family. She told me, I finally realized teaching is what I do, but growth is who I am. That's identity beyond title. So here are a few reflection questions that you can ask yourself to go deeper into self-awareness. Who am I if the badge, rank, or title is gone tomorrow? Where do I confuse what I do with who I am? What values, purpose, or truth anchor me deeper than roles? And here's a truth I offer you. Titles end, roles change, badges fade, and uniforms get folded away. If your leadership identity is built only on those, you will crumble when they're gone. But if your identity is anchored in values, purpose, and integrity, you will stand. You will lead with clarity, not desperation. You will inspire trust, not grasp for it. So let me ask you again, who are you without the title? If you can answer that, you've found the compass point of identity, and that compass will guide you through every shift and storm. Thank you for joining me on Rise Up Voices from the Frontline, especially our Trauma-Informed Leadership series. If this episode challenged you, share it, because movements need leaders who know who they are, not just what they're called. And if you would like to work with me one-on-one in trauma transformation, life mastery, or leadership, or you would like to bring one of our specialized trainings to your organization, book a free connection call using the link in the show description. And I can't wait to walk with you as you rise up out of the ashes of your experiences and live and lead your life on fire.
Become a Rise Up Hero sponsor to provide mental wellness and crisis response resources for those who serve country and community. Join us in the Rise Up